There we go. The recording will be posted 24 hours after the meeting concludes. So this is the overview of our 5 topics. We're going to be grouping the feedback around the questions, roughly about 30 minutes each. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So the meeting structure, Myers and Stauffer will introduce the discussion questions, and we will be sort of the timekeepers and the muters and unmuters for the meeting to moderate the conversation as it goes through. We would like to make sure that you keep your comments to the topic under discussion. And as I said before, we're recording this meeting in order to make sure we capture all of the feedback people have to offer. When you ask to speak, please introduce yourself and the service you provide to make sure that we can associate your feedback specifically to the services you're speaking about. Try and contain your comments to the relevant discussion topic that's being discussed. If you hear previous points that other people have made, you can say that you agree with them, and instead of just repeating everything that they said. And if we could make sure that we limit the comments to the payment methodology and not the actual payment rates. As we've said before, we're going to have a second group of stakeholdering where we have the opportunity to talk about the rate amounts. Next slide. The phase 2 meetings will be an opportunity to comment on payment levels, and they will follow the release of the benchmarking report that will provide some information overall about the rates and how they're used in other states, commercial health plans, and Medicare. And it'll catalog all the existing payment methodology, as well as recommend services that may be candidates for alternative payment models. If you are unable to speak today, or you think of something afterwards, or you would just prefer to submit your comments in writing, you can email us at ratesettingeval@maine.gov, and we will look at all of the comments that are submitted there and incorporate them. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to start our discussion. This is the first question. How well is the current methodology working for the services you provide? And sort of to help you answer this, what we're really looking for is your payment methodology transparent and easily understandable? Do you feel that it creates opportunities for efficiency and economy in the way in which you provide services? Does it reflect how you deliver services? For example, do you provide a bundle of services, but you have to bill separately for each one of them? Or does the methodology require that you bill for minutes of service when an hour or greater, if you offer your services are typically an hour or 3 hours, and you're billing in 15-minute increments? If you would like to speak under this question or any of the other ones as we move forward, please raise your hand. Like I said, the little hand, raise your hand button looks like a little hand, and it's usually left to a button that looks like a megaphone. If you cannot raise your hand, if you can't find it, you can chat to us in the chat box, and Jillian can see that, and she will be able to unmute you that way. So at this point, if you would like to comment under this question, please go ahead and raise your hand.
Okay, first up, I've got Margaret Longsworth.
Hi, this is Margaret Longsworth. I'm the Director of Mental Health and Clinical Services at OHI, and I'm specifically speaking about the PNMI Appendix E program. That is a cost-settled program, and I do believe that the rate, the way that rate is set works for that program. It's paid on a daily billing, and because we can adjust our expenses and apply for a rate change, it has made it possible to keep that service funded at a level that is successful. It is not all that easy to understand the rates that are paid across the entire state. You have to really dig and have a little bit of luck on your side to find that information, to be able to compare what you are being paid to what other organizations are being paid for the same service. I also want to say that the success of this service and how well this payment method works for this service is tied to the community services, specifically Section 17 and Section 65, in terms of efficiencies and cost savings. If we don't have a robust system at the next lower level of care, people get stuck in this level of care, and that limits the efficiencies and cost savings that we can achieve within the PNMIs. We need to have some improvement in maintaining that community system of care so we can have people discharged out of this more intensive level of care. The other thing that I would say is that, well, you can apply for a rate adjustment to keep pace with minimum wage increases and workforce challenges, because a lot of the people who work in these PNMI services have the same credentials as people working in some of the community services, specifically the community rehab service in Section 17 that also employs MHRT1s. There are wage pressures that we can't increase the wage in the PNMI without really unbalancing things in that other community service. And that is a real challenge, particularly as the state has gone through the minimum wage increases in the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Next up, I've got Heidi Manser.
Hi, this is Heidi Manser. I'm from Uplift Incorporated in Gardner, Maine. I am commenting specifically on PNMI Appendix F. However, when I look at the overall payment methodology for PNMI services in Maine, I don't feel it is transparent or easily understandable. Section 97 of the MaineCare Benefits Manual is kind of a jumbled mix of services that's been piecemealed together over time. This single section requires 5 separate appendices in order to delineate the differences in reimbursement for each section. For example, there's absolutely no similarities between, or very little similarities between the services provided and reimbursed in the reimbursement process for Appendix F services and services provided and reimbursed under Appendix D. They're completely different. Even within individual appendices, the reimbursement mechanisms are not always clear. Appendix F PNMIs are often described as cost reimbursed facilities. However, the current process for reimbursement includes caps and limits on direct care costs, routine service costs, and there's an extremely limited allowance for management and oversight. In our PNMI, which is a 5-bed situation, the current reimbursement for management oversight is $25,909 per fiscal year, which works out to be about $12.45 an hour, and the state with minimum wage is up well over $12 an hour now. Margaret mentioned that in her experience, in the appendix that she was commenting on, that there is an ability to change or adjust rates when expenses have fluctuated. That has not been an easy experience for us in Appendix F. On a final note, I'm not sure where my comment fits, but the services that are provided in our Appendix F PNMI are identical, indistinguishable from the services that we provide in our Level 3 in our Section 21 homes. For us, the same staff provide the service. They provide the same type of service with a completely different reimbursement process. We've experienced significant losses in this program, and our board is currently reviewing whether we will continue to provide this service. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Next up I have, let's see, Rick Erb.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to comment. I will speak about PNMI Appendix C today. To put it into some context, I want to say that the Appendix C PNMIs have been a successful program overall. They are working as intended and have saved the state of Maine significant money by providing a less expensive option to nursing homes and provided a less institutional model for residents. Satisfaction surveys of residents and families have demonstrated strong results. I would say that one of the strengths of the current payment methodology is that allows providers to retain savings from the direct care component if they are generated. It has allowed them to remain viable and provides an incentive for efficiency. It allows for necessary but not always accepted costs to be paid with those funds. I would also say that it's important to remember that PNMIs are not small nursing homes, even though they serve a similar population. They were built on a social model, and any value-based programs should recognize that history and create incentives that will work for their setting and with their level of staffing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, I have Brandi Farron.
Good morning. Yes, this is Brandi Farron from Kennebec Behavioral Health, and for purposes of today's meeting, I oversee our Appendix E PNMIs. And so I agree with the lady from OHI and her contention around the Appendix E's. I would just like to add that I appreciate the current rate setting methodology in that while she noted being able the desire to see other folks' rates, I appreciate the flexibility that's built into those the current rate setting in that some they aren't all created equal, in that some PNMIs have things like occupational therapy built in, substance use disorder support and assessment, those kinds of things. So I do believe that the current methodology allows for the inclusion of those kinds of things. And I would also echo the piece about needing to have a more robust system for the lower level of care, including, and I realize this was yesterday's conversation, but part of like community rehab services and having a similar methodology for services that are a step down from PNMI. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brandi. Next up, I have Lisa Trundy. Sorry, I can't see the last of your name.
That's okay. That's perfectly fine. I'd like to echo Rick Erb's sentiment and thank you for letting us speak here. I agree with the points that Rick made in regards to the Appendix C facilities, which is what I will be talking about in particular this morning. A couple of important points. So the case mix adjustment is a real favorable aspect to the rate of the Appendix C PNMI rate. However, it's on a facility-wide basis, and it's based on a window of time. And we would suggest that there be an individual resident case mix system. The rate letters are extremely complex as they have been tweaked over time. And it's very difficult unless you're living in these rate letters on a day-to-day basis for people to understand their rate and the components of the rate that they're earning. In regards to the capital rate, it reimburses facilities in arrears for their capital improvements, and there's no real mechanism for reimbursement for related party leases. Additionally, in order to maintain MaineCare neutrality, a lot of beds have to be taken offline whenever there is a sale or an upgrade. So what's happening is we're really closing 2 facilities in order to build 1, and we see that as a capacity issue going forward in the state. And then lastly, it's very much appreciated that there have been COLA rate increases over in part components of the rate, but we believe that the COLA increases should be on all parts of the rates. I think that's about it for today.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Let's see. I'm not seeing any new hands. If you still have your hand up and you are done speaking, if you could lower your hand, that lets me know if anyone else has a comment that they just thought of and want to re-speak. Thank you. So next up I have Kevin Brooks.
Yeah, this is Kevin Brooks from the Maine Veterans Homes, and I was going to speak about Appendix C as well. I did want to agree with the comments from Mr. Erb and Ms. Trundy Witten with everything they said. We really agree with those comments. One thing that our organization would be interested in is with any new methodology that is instituted would incorporate some flexibility for providers with identification of unique circumstances. So we're looking to tie some additional reimbursement to any providers that have like a truly unique circumstance for these Appendix C services that they are providing. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I'm not seeing any new hands or comments in the chat. Julia.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So our next question, question 2, is really looking at what the methodology creates incentives for. So is it creating the right incentives for quality of care, access to care, primary and preventative care, the integration of care and care coordination, how members use services, and is it structured in a way that it can avoid or helps to avoid abuse and fraud? So if you would like to comment under this question, please go ahead and raise your hand or chat and test the chat box so that Jillian can see and unmute you.
Okay, thank you. First up, I've got Rick Erb.
Hi, it's Rick Erb, Maine Healthcare Association. I wanted to say that the current case mix payment methodology does provide incentives to facilities to accept residents with more complex needs. We think that's a positive. Case mix procedure, as Lisa had said, could be improved if it was implemented on an individual resident basis. Currently, they have to wait 6 months for rate adjustments at some times. We have felt for some time that the case mix methodology does not capture all of the needs of dementia residents. We know there is a time study being conducted. I am hopeful that that will help that situation. In our payment system, we think that Maine does need to address upgrading and replacing aging facilities. Payment methodology should find a way to support those improvements. And I would also say that there is now language for an extraordinary circumstance allowance for PNMIs, which is similar to what nursing homes have had for some time. It should allow the state to address urgent problems facing individual facilities or groups of them. But in reality, in the nursing homes and in the limited experience with the PNMIs, it has been cumbersome and rarely implemented. So we would like to see some improvements there. Not sure I said so at the beginning, but all of my comments relate to PNMI Appendix C. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Next up, I've got Lisa.
Thanks. This is Lisa Trendy from Barry Dunn, and these comments are in regards to Appendix C. So the first point is efficiency is encouraged. With the direct care rate is not cost settled, so it does encourage some creative staffing in care. There are incentives there to admit residential care patients with medical needs, but there's no incentive for dementia care unless it's a specified dementia care facility. I do agree with Rick's comment on the case mix. An additional point would be that the case mix window discourages discharges to other care settings prior to the case mix review window. So conversely, a facility may delay an admission prior to the window so that it doesn't bring their case mix average down. Again, back to the capital, it's a fixed rate. And so there's no incentive for innovation or to modernize processes. Computer systems and software are now a routine cost. There's no benefit to the facilities to modernize. Essentially, the providers are not reimbursed because it was a capital cost when the rates were initially developed, and now it's routine, which is capped. Multi-level facilities versus standalone facilities, so skilled and res care together. Many times the cost structure is very different at a multi-level facility, but the payment rate is still the same. The personal care rate, the PCS rate, if you're under that rate, if your cost is under the rate, you need to pay back. So if you're over, you don't. So there's a disincentive for cost management for high MaineCare facilities. And then lastly on this comment is access to care. So the mental health and substance abuse rules are kind of in conflict and they're unsafe for the resident population. And there's really no part of the rate to address these matters. And thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up, I've got Jessica Duffy. Jessica, are you speaking? I don't think we can hear you. You might be muted on your end. You're not muted on my end. Oh, now you're muted again. Okay, it looks like we might have some trouble hearing you. If you work it out on your end, let me know. If not, if you want to submit a comment in the chat, we are also recording comments in the chat and on the email. I'm saving any comments in the chat as part of the meeting. Okay, Kevin, I see your hand up. Is it still up or is it new up? Is it up again for this question?
No comment.
Okay. Then next I've got Margaret.
Hi, this is Margaret Longsworth from OHI, again speaking about PNMI Appendix E. The payment methodology for that particular appendix, I wouldn't say that there are necessarily incentives in there, but it is funded in a way that is sufficient to promote quality of care, integration, prevention, care coordination, and because it's cost settled, I think there's an avoidance of abuse and fraud in there. The access to care component really is tied to the gatekeeping system, and I think the gatekeeping system should probably have some attention paid to it in terms of really monitoring how long beds stay vacant as we try to process through referrals, particularly for the priority one folks who are sent our way. Certainly coordinating a discharge from a hospital can take some time, but sometimes it seems like that length of time is excessive and that we're really trying to admit people who are not yet ready for discharge. So again, the success of this service is dependent upon another component that is not within the provider's control. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm not seeing any new hands or comments in the chat for this question.
Okay, great. So question number 3 is really about the equity of the payment methodology. So Is the payment methodology for the services you provide equitable to the methodologies for services delivered by other provider groups? So are all or most providers within your service area treated equitably in terms of payment methodology, how fee schedules are determined and updated, the level of administrative burden that's associated with that, and whether or not incentives are part of the methodology to incentivize quality and access. So if you would like to comment under this question, please go ahead and raise your hand or chat to us in the chat box.
Okay, first up, I've got Rick.
Rick Erb, Maine Healthcare Association, speaking regarding Appendix C. I wasn't sure where this comment should appear, but I'd like to just quickly say that I know that part of the evaluation will include comparing programs in other states. I would say that Maine's PNMIs serve a population that is higher need than assisted living in most other states, and definitely a higher percentage of Medicaid utilization. Many PNMI residents, Appendix C residents, would qualify for nursing home level of care in other states. And I would say that comparison should be approached with caution. May not be possible given the differences between Maine and other states. I would also point out that in Maine, there are a small number of facilities referred to as adult family care homes. They serve a similar population to PNMIs, although are usually even smaller. I would ask that they not be forgotten in this review process, as they sometimes are left behind. We do represent some of the adult family care homes. The other thing I would say is that there is a service provider tax that applies to all PNMIs. In our case, we find this inequitable because private pay assisted living facilities may provide very similar services. They may be practically identical, but the PNI Appendix C facilities are subject to the service provider tax. The private pay are not. It creates a disadvantage to accept MaineCare and puts facilities that do accept MaineCare at a competitive disadvantage. We would like to see that reevaluated. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, I have Lisa Trundy-Witten.
Hi, this is Lisa Trundy-Witten, Dunn, and this is in regards to Appendix C. In regards to the equitable treatment, the PNMI Appendix C facilities still have an arbitrary cap without inflation on administrator costs. Other facilities, NIFs and ICFMRs, no longer have that cap on the particular cost. And then in regards to bed hold days, we get a partial payment, but they're required to hold the beds. It seems to be an unfair practice. And I would like to agree with Rick's comment in regards to the program and its comparableness to other states. We do provide a much higher level of service at our PNMIs than other states do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Next, I have Christy.
Hi, yes, this is Christy Visitor from NFI North. I'm speaking specifically about Appendix D facilities. First, I'd like to agree with the speaker a moment ago that the tax for services, particularly for those of us who are a nonprofit accepting only Medicare, is a burden. I'd also like to speak to fee schedules for Appendix D have not been updated for several years. And that's certainly a factor in terms of determining equitability for other methodologies. I do believe the administrative burden, however, for Appendix D is fairly low and would be concerned about that and moving toward one of the other types of service payment options in the future. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I am not seeing any other hands or anything in the chat box for this question.
Okay, so our next two questions are about value-based purchasing and then administrative requirements. So the first, is the methodology consistent with value-based purchasing? Is it consistent with any other value-based purchasing approaches that you have in place through other payers or that you are aware of? And then secondarily, are there administrative requirements such as coding, billing, or reimbursement related to the methodology that MaineCare specifically places on you that you feel are burdensome? So if you could just go ahead and raise your hand or chat to us if you'd like to comment on either of these questions.
Okay, first up I've got Rick.
Ricker, Maine Healthcare Association, speaking to Appendix C. I will be brief on this. I'm not aware of a strong correlation to value-based purchasing at this time. What I would ask is, as the value-based purchasing is being considered, that we recognize the very low staffing requirements and size of PNMIs in comparison to other long-term care facilities. There's much less administrative staff in assisted living, as it was created to be social model, not clinical in nature. We would ask that as value-based purchasing program needs are assessed, that these be tailored to the staffing levels that we have and the amount of administrative staff that we have. Avoid having overly complex plans for value-based purchasing. As far as if you are taking the administrative burdens as well, we will outline those in written comments. One thing that did come up is the process for paying for capital costs is seen as being burdensome in the PNMI Appendix C. We will address in written comments and others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, I've got Lisa Trundy-Witten.
Hi, this is Lisa, and I'm speaking in regards to Appendix C. I agree with Rick's comments on the value-based purchasing. In regards to the administrative burdens, again, the capital rate is in arrears, is reimbursed in arrears. And recently, just over the past 2 years, there have been a significant number of exceptions and prior approvals required in the cost reporting process, reimbursement process. Example, prior approval for vehicles, the offset of D&O insurance, software costs moving from routine, more limitations on refinancing, renovations, and rehabbing capitalized assets. The department is not allowing rehab of capitalized assets, even though it's in compliance with GAAP and should be capitalized. So it's inconsistent. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up from the chat, I have David Dill.
Thank you. This is David Dill, Director of Finance for New Communities. And my comments, I agree with Lisa and Rick for the most part regarding the value-based purchasing. I just want to say that, you know, the value of quality, something that is not currently really flexible enough in Appendix C, which is really what I'm talking about right now. Meaning that even though we have a case mix which adjusts for complexity, I don't find there's enough of incentive there for quality to really change in a period of time. So I'd like to see that concept of the ability to change our staffing ratios because it's set. And so when you have a higher case mix for a period of time, you don't really have the ability to adjust those staffing ratios to accommodate for those complexities. I think it goes directly to quality. So if we're going to look at it from a quality standpoint, you need to realize that quality goes back to the amount of employees and staff that can accommodate some of these complex residents. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm not seeing any more hands up or comments in the chat on either of these questions.
Okay. If you go ahead and move to the next slide, that closes out our questions here at the end. Since we have some time, I just want to open it up to anyone who, if you have something that you feel like is really important for us to understand that has not already been mentioned, please raise your hand now and we will open it up briefly for sort of miscellaneous comments related to anything you feel is important for us to understand as we move forward. If you don't wish to speak, of course, don't hesitate to email us at the ratesettingeval@maine.gov. We will include all of those comments as well.
Okay, first up I've got Margaret.
Hi, this is Margaret Longsworth from OHI, again, talking about the PNMI Appendix E. In the Appendix C, there is no bed hold rate, so when a bed is empty, you just don't get paid for it, but because it's a cost-settled program, that usually, it washes out, basically. But if there was some kind of way to have some incentive put in around reducing the length of time that bed is empty. And I don't know that it's an incentive that really needs to be applied to the organization, but to the gatekeeping hospital coordination piece. If they either had to pay to hold that bed open while the referral is being processed, or some way to bring some additional pressure to bear on creating some efficiencies in that mechanism. It would need to be a very creative strategy, but it's, I think, worth looking at.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I'm not seeing any additional hands up or comments. Oh, I got one here. Christy?
I just like to agree with Margaret's comments regarding bed hold. We're required to hold beds for a significant amount of time during hospitalization, and there is no revenue adjustment for that. We'd definitely like to see that addressed in the future. I'd also just like to add, regarding the methodology issue, it would be great to have increasing costs built in somehow in regards to the CPI, or legislative changes such as minimum wage increases being built into that methodology for rates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. And I think that's all I have. Julia?
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning and giving us some of your time. If you still, if you think of anything later, don't hesitate to reach out to us at the ratesettingeval@maine.gov email address. And we thank you again very much for coming and spending your morning with us. And I hope you have a good rest of your Friday.